Sometimes the smallest acts of loyalty remind us what it means to be human. Sometimes a desperate bark can wake a heart that's been sleeping for years. Jack Rawlins is a widowed rancher who spent a decade shutting himself off from the world. When his aging dog Daisy gets trapped in a collapsed irrigation ditch, her young pup Scout refuses to give up, barking frantically until Jack finally hears the call. What begins as a desperate rescue becomes a journey back to life, as Jack confronts the grief he's buried and discovers that sometimes being saved means letting yourself love again. But will one man find the strength to rebuild what years of sorrow have torn down? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun came up over the Rawlins Ranch the same way it had for the past 10 years, indifferent and unforgiving. Jack stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands, watching the light creep across land that had once meant everything to him. Now it was just acres of obligation, fields he worked, because stopping would mean admitting defeat. The house still smelled like Sarah sometimes. Or maybe that was just his mind playing tricks. 10 years was a long time to hold on to a ghost, but Jack had gotten good at it. The wedding ring sat in a small wooden box on his nightstand, the one place in the house he allowed himself to remember. Every other trace of her had been packed away in the attic 3 months after the funeral, not because he wanted to forget, but because remembering hurt too much to do it everywhere. All the time. He'd been 52 when she died. Cancer, they said, though the word never seemed big enough for what it took from him. They'd had 30 years together. 30 years of building this ranch from nothing, of early mornings and late nights, of shared dreams and quiet conversations on the porch. She'd been the one who wanted the dogs. She'd been the one who insisted on planting flowers by the fence line every spring. She'd been the one who made this place feel like more than just dirt and work. Now the flowers were long gone, choked out by weeds he didn't have the heart to pull. The fence lines sagged in places where posts had rotted through. The barn needed new shingles, had needed them for 3 years now. Jack knew all the things that were falling apart. He kept a mental list, though he never seemed to get around to fixing any of it. The ranch had been profitable once. Good cattle, decent water from the irrigation system, enough hay to get through the winters. But the drought had started 6 years back and never really stopped. The herd had dwindled from 200 head to barely 60. The irrigation ditches, hand-dug by his grandfather in the 1940s, were cracking and collapsing in sections. Last year he'd lost 2 calves when a section gave way and flooded a low pasture at the wrong time. He should have fixed it. Should have called someone, or at least patched it himself. But every repair felt like a promise to keep going, and Jack wasn't sure he wanted to make that promise anymore. The coffee tasted like dirt. He poured it down the sink and rinsed the cup, setting it in the dish rack with the precision of a man who did everything the same way, every day, because routine was the only thing keeping him upright. Outside, he could hear Daisy barking, her old hoarse bark that didn't carry like it used to. She was 12 now, getting grey around the muzzle, moving slower than she had even a year ago. Sarah had brought her home as a puppy, a golden retriever with eyes too big for her face and paws she hadn't grown into yet. Every home needs a heart, Sarah had said, cradling the squirming bundle, and this one's ours. Daisy had been their heart for a long time. After Sarah died, the dog had stayed close to Jack in a way that felt almost human, like she understood what had been lost and was trying to fill the space. He'd never asked for that kind of devotion, never encouraged it. But Daisy gave it anyway. Then 2 years ago, Daisy had surprised him. Puppies, 4 of them, though only 1 survived past the first week. Scout, the name had come from nowhere. Just popped into Jack's head when he saw the pup trying to climb out of the whelping box before his eyes were even open. A little explorer. A scout. Scout was everything Daisy had been as a puppy. Boundless energy, curiosity that got him into trouble, a tail that never stopped wagging. Jack fed him, made sure he had water, let him sleep in the barn with Daisy, but he kept his distance. Dogs didn't live forever, and he'd already learned what it cost to love something that could leave you. He pulled on his boots and stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked under his weight, another thing that needed fixing. The air smelled like dust and dried grass, the kind of smell that meant the land was thirsty. They'd had some rain in the spring, but not enough. Never enough. Daisy came trotting around the corner of the house, Scout tumbling after her like a golden shadow. The pup had grown into a handsome dog, nearly 2 years old now, with his mother's soft eyes and a coat that shone even in the harsh sunlight. He bounded up to Jack, tail wagging, and dropped a stick at his feet. Jack looked down at the stick, then at Scout. "Not today, boy." Scout picked up the stick and dropped it again, dancing in place with the kind of hope that made Jack feel tired. After a moment, Jack stepped over the stick and headed toward the barn. Scout watched him go, then picked up the stick and carried it back to Daisy. Like maybe she'd play instead. The barn was darker and cooler, dust motes drifting in the shafts of light that came through the gaps in the walls. The cattle were out in the pasture, but Jack went through the motions anyway, checking water troughs, examining the hay supply, making sure the tack room was secure. It was something to do. It ate up the hours. He'd had neighbors once, real neighbors, the kind who stopped by with casseroles after Sarah died, who offered to help with the harvest, who invited him to town gatherings and church socials. Tom and Linda Brenner had the spread to the east, and they'd tried for years to draw Jack back into the world. But he'd turned them down so many times that they'd eventually stopped asking. Now, when he saw Tom in town, they'd nod at each other, and that was all. The town itself was dying too. Mercer's Bend had never been much. A main street, a grocery store, a post office, a diner that served breakfast all day. But even those were fading. The grocery store was down to half its original size, consolidating inventory to one side of the building. The diner had cut its hours. Young people left for the cities and didn't come back. The ones who remained were like Jack, people with nowhere else to go, or people who'd decided that staying was easier than leaving. He'd gotten a notice from the bank last month. Not a foreclosure notice, not yet, but a warning. The mortgage was 3 months behind. He had some savings, enough to catch up if he wanted to. But wanting required caring, and caring required hope. And hope was a thing Jack had misplaced somewhere in the last decade. By noon, he'd finished the barn work and started on the fences. The wire was rusted in places, sagging where the tension had gone slack. He moved from post to post, testing the stability, making notes in his head about what needed replacing. Most of it, probably. The work was mindless and repetitive, which suited him fine. Scout appeared beside him around 1 o'clock, panting from running around the property. The pup had something in his mouth. Looked like an old work glove Jack had lost months ago. Scout dropped it proudly at Jack's feet, tail wagging so hard his whole back end shook. "Where'd you find that?" Jack picked up the glove, crusted with dried mud. Scout barked once, sharp and pleased with himself, then took off running again, Daisy following at a more measured pace. Jack watched them go. Daisy was limping a little on her front left leg. Arthritis, probably. She was getting to that age. He should take her to the vet in Hadleyville, but that was a 40-minute drive, and he'd been putting it off. He put most things off these days. The afternoon stretched long and hot. Jack worked until his shoulders ached and his hands were raw, then headed back to the house as the sun started its descent. The dogs were waiting on the porch, Daisy lying down with her head on her paws. Scout sitting at attention like he was guarding the door. Jack filled their bowls with kibble and fresh water, then went inside without a word. The evening routine was the same as always. Heat up whatever was in the freezer, eat standing at the counter, wash the single plate and fork, sit on the couch with the television on, but the sound turned low. He didn't really watch it, just needed the flicker of light, the sense that somewhere in the world life was still happening. Around 9, he climbed the stairs to the bedroom. The house felt too big at night, all those empty rooms holding all that empty space. Sarah's craft room, the guest room they'd always meant to turn into a nursery but never did. The office, where she'd kept the ranch books and made it all make sense. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened the nightstand drawer. The wooden box was small, plain, made from cedar. Sarah had kept her jewelry in it when she was alive, a few pairs of earrings, a bracelet her mother had given her, and the wedding ring she'd taken off those last few weeks in the hospital when her hands had swollen. It didn't fit anymore. Jack opened the box and looked at the ring. Simple gold band, worn smooth from 30 years of wearing. He didn't take it out, hadn't taken it out in years. Just looked at it, the same way he did every night, and felt the weight of everything he'd lost settle over him like a familiar blanket. "I'm tired, Sarah," he said to the empty room. "I don't know how to keep doing this." The room didn't answer. It never did. But saying it out loud helped sometimes, made the loneliness feel less like drowning and more like just treading water. He closed the box and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow would be the same as today, and the day after that, and the day after that. The ranch would keep falling apart. The bank would keep sending notices. The dogs would keep trying to make him feel something. And Jack would keep going through the motions because stopping felt like too much work. He turned off the light and lay down in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him, and waited for another day to end. The next morning started the same way all his mornings started. Cold coffee, empty kitchen, the mechanical rhythm of boots and work clothes, and another day that stretched out like all the others. Jack was halfway through his first cup when he heard the barking. Not Daisy's bark. Scout's. The pup had a different sound, higher pitched, more urgent. Usually he was barking at rabbits or shadows, chasing things that didn't matter. Jack ignored it and poured the rest of his coffee down the sink. He had fence posts to check in the north pasture, and the day wasn't getting any younger, but the barking didn't stop. Jack pulled on his jacket and stepped outside. Scout was standing at the edge of the yard, barking toward the back pasture. Not his playful bark, something else. Something that made the hair on Jack's neck prickle with an instinct he thought he'd lost. "Scout," Jack called. "Quit that racket!" Scout ignored him completely. Just kept barking, then ran a few yards toward the pasture, then ran back, then barked again. The pattern repeated: run, return, bark. Run, return, bark. Jack felt irritation rise in his chest. "Scout, I don't have time for your—" The pup took off running, disappearing over the small rise that led to the irrigation ditches. Jack waited for him to come back. When he didn't, Jack sighed and started walking. Probably found a jackrabbit den or got himself stuck in something. Dog was always getting into trouble. He crested the rise and stopped. Scout was standing at the edge of the old irrigation ditch, the one that ran along the back pasture, the one Jack had been meaning to inspect for months now. The pup was barking down into it, his whole body vibrating with the effort, and from the ditch, Jack heard something that made his blood go cold. Daisy, whimpering. He was running before he made the conscious decision to move, his boots pounding over the hard-packed earth. Scout saw him coming and barked louder, like he was saying, "Finally, finally, I've been calling you." Jack reached the edge of the ditch and looked down. The irrigation channel was about 6 feet deep here, hand-dug generations ago when water was more plentiful and the land more forgiving. Normally there was just a trickle at the bottom, barely enough to keep the earth damp. But a section of the wall had collapsed, a good 10 feet of it, slumping inward in a pile of dirt and rock and dried clay, and trapped underneath it, her back legs buried in debris, was Daisy. Oh, God! The words came out before Jack could stop them. "Daisy girl, hold on!" The dog's eyes found his, and the look in them was pure trust. She whimpered again, trying to pull herself free, but the weight of the collapsed earth held her fast. Blood matted the fur on her left hind leg, where something sharp had caught her. Jack's mind went blank with panic, then snapped into focus with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He needed to get down there, needed to dig her out, needed to do it now before the rest of the wall collapsed and buried her completely. He looked around wildly for something, anything. The nearest tool shed was back at the barn, too far. His truck had a shovel in the bed, but that was even farther. There wasn't time to run back for it, so Jack did the only thing he could do. He jumped down into the ditch. The landing jarred his knees, sent pain shooting up his legs, but he didn't care. He scrambled to Daisy's side, Scout barking encouragement from above. The collapsed section was loose enough that Jack could dig with his hands, scooping away dirt and rock, working as fast as he could. "It's okay, girl," he said, his voice shaking. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." Daisy whimpered and licked his arm, and the simple gesture of trust nearly undid him. She believed he would save her. After all these years of him being nothing, doing nothing, feeling nothing, this dog still believed in him. His fingers hit something hard, a rock the size of his fist, pinning Daisy's right hind leg. Jack dug around it, trying to get leverage, his fingernails splitting as he clawed at the packed earth. The rock wouldn't budge. "Come on," he growled, bracing his feet and pulling with everything he had. "Come on!" The rock shifted just an inch, but it was enough. Jack redoubled his efforts, digging and pulling and digging again, sweat pouring down his face despite the morning chill. His hands were bleeding now, he could feel it, but stopping wasn't an option. Above him, Scout paced the edge of the ditch, whining. "I know, buddy," Jack panted. "I know, almost there." The earth gave way in chunks, falling aside as Jack excavated around Daisy's trapped legs. He could see now that her left leg was cut but not broken, probably caught on a piece of old wire, embedded in the dirt. Her right leg was just pinned, held fast by the weight of the collapsed wall. Jack got his arms under her chest and pulled gently, testing. Daisy yelped in pain. "Sorry, girl." "I'm sorry." He went back to digging, faster now, desperate. The sun was climbing higher, and the ditch was getting warmer. How long had she been down here? How long had Scout been trying to get his attention? He didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to think about what would have happened if Scout had given up. If Jack had ignored the barking just a little longer, if he'd been too wrapped up in his own misery to hear the call. His hands found the wire that had cut Daisy's leg, and he worked it loose from the debris, careful not to cause more damage. The metal was old and brittle, probably from the original fence line his grandfather had put up 70 years ago. It came free with a snap, and Daisy whimpered in relief. "One more," Jack told her. "One more, and you're out of here." He attacked the pile, holding her right leg with renewed determination, digging until his shoulders burned and his breath came in ragged gasps. The dirt and rock fell away in a small avalanche, and suddenly Daisy's leg was free. Jack didn't give her time to think about the pain. He scooped her up in his arms, all 70 pounds of her, and stood on shaking legs. She was heavier than he remembered, or maybe he was just older, weaker, more worn down. It didn't matter. He had her. Getting out of the ditch was harder than getting in. The walls were steep and crumbling, and Jack had one chance to do this right. He looked up at Scout, who was still pacing anxiously. "Back up, boy," Jack said. "Give us room." Scout retreated a few steps, and Jack took a deep breath. Then he lunged at the wall, driving his boots into the packed earth, climbing one-handed while cradling Daisy against his chest. She whimpered but didn't struggle, trusting him completely even as his grip threatened to slip. His boot found purchase on a root sticking out of the wall. He pushed up, reached with his free hand for the edge, felt his fingers close on dry grass. For a terrible moment he thought he'd slip, thought they'd both tumble back down into the ditch. But then Scout was there, barking encouragement, and Jack found strength he didn't know he had left. He heaved himself up and over the edge, rolling onto his back with Daisy still clutched against him. For a long moment he just lay there, staring up at the pale blue sky, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. Scout bounded over and licked his face, then licked Daisy's, whining with relief. "Good boy," Jack managed. "Good boy, Scout, you saved her." He sat up slowly, cradling Daisy in his lap. Her leg was still bleeding, but not badly. The cut wasn't as deep as he'd feared. She looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes, and something inside Jack's chest cracked open. He'd spent 10 years shutting down, shutting out, building walls higher than the ones that surrounded this ranch. And it had taken one trapped dog and one desperate puppy to break through. Tears came before he could stop them, hot and fast and carrying 10 years of grief with them. Jack bent over Daisy and wept, his shoulders shaking, while Scout pressed against his side and the morning sun climbed higher over a ranch that suddenly felt worth saving. Jack carried Daisy back to the house, with Scout trailing close behind. Never more than a few feet away from his mother, the walk felt longer than it should have, every step reminding Jack how much he'd let himself deteriorate right along with the ranch. His arms shook from the effort, his lungs burned, and by the time he made it to the porch he had to sit down hard on the steps just to catch his breath. Daisy lay across his lap, patient and trusting. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but the wound needed proper attention. Jack knew that much. He also knew he couldn't handle this alone. The realization sat heavy in his gut. For 10 years he'd handled everything alone. Or more accurately, he'd avoided handling most things at all. But this was different. This was a life depending on him. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, that actually mattered. He settled Daisy on an old blanket in the kitchen, then went to the drawer where Sarah used to keep important papers. The drawer stuck when he pulled it, swollen from years of humidity and neglect, but it finally gave way with a reluctant scrape. Inside was a chaos of old receipts, expired coupons, instruction manuals for appliances they no longer owned, and there, tucked in a yellowed envelope, was what he was looking for: Dr. Ellen Morrison, DVM, Hadleyville Veterinary Clinic. The business card was creased and faded, the corners soft from age. Sarah had kept it after their last visit years ago, when Daisy was still a pup. "Just in case," she'd said, filing it away with that careful efficiency she'd brought to everything. Jack stared at the phone number printed in small, practical letters. Making the call felt like more than just getting help for Daisy. It felt like admitting he couldn't do this alone, that his decade of isolation had been a choice he could no longer afford to make. His hands were still shaking when he picked up the phone. The receiver felt strange against his ear. He couldn't remember the last time he'd made a call that wasn't to the bank or the feed store. He dialed the number slowly, half hoping no one would answer. Someone answered on the second ring. "Hadleyville Veterinary Clinic. This is Jesse speaking." Jack's throat closed up. He'd forgotten how to do this, how to talk to people about things that mattered. "Hello?" the voice prompted. "Young patient. Can I help you?" "I need—" Jack's voice came out rough, unused. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I need to bring my dog in. She's hurt." "Okay, sir. Can I get your name?" "Rawlins. Jack Rawlins." There was a pause, and Jack heard the soft clicking of computer keys. "I have you in our system from 2014. Has it really been that long since Daisy's last visit?" The familiarity of it caught Jack off guard. They remembered. Someone remembered. "Yes," he managed. "That's right. It's Daisy. She got trapped in a collapsed ditch. Leg wound, bleeding's mostly stopped, but she needs to be looked at, of course. Mr. Rawlins, Dr. Morrison can see you this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Or if it's an emergency, we can work you in earlier. 2 is fine." Jack looked down at Daisy, who was resting quietly on the blanket. Scout had curled up beside her, his head resting protectively on her side. 2 o'clock. "Thank you." He hung up before the conversation could go any further, before he had to explain where he'd been or why it had been so long. His hands were still shaking, but whether from the rescue or from making the call, he couldn't tell. The hours until 2 o'clock stretched out with an unfamiliar kind of tension. Jack cleaned Daisy's wound with warm water and some antiseptic he found in the bathroom cabinet. Probably expired, but better than nothing. She tolerated his ministrations with the patience of an old soul, only flinching when he touched the deepest part of the cut. "I'm sorry," he told her, and meant it for more than just the immediate pain. "I should have fixed that ditch months ago. Should have been paying attention." Scout watched the whole process from 2 feet away, his eyes tracking every movement Jack made. The pup had gone quiet, all his usual energy subdued by concern for his mother. Jack found himself talking to both dogs as he worked, filling the silence with words he hadn't spoken in years. "Your mum used to do this," he said, dabbing at the wound with a clean cloth. "Take care of things. Take care of me when I'd come in from the fields all beat up and stubborn. She had these gentle hands, could stitch up a cut or set a bone, and make you feel like everything was going to be all right." He paused, the memory sharp enough to hurt. "I miss her every single day. And I know that's not an excuse for how I've been, for letting everything fall apart, but it's the truth." Daisy licked his hand, a simple gesture that felt like forgiveness. At 1:30, Jack loaded Daisy carefully into the passenger seat of his truck. Scout tried to jump in too, and Jack didn't have the heart to tell him no. The pup settled in the back, his nose pressed against the window, and they headed down the long driveway toward the main road. The drive to Hadleyville took 40 minutes, winding through country that had once been prosperous ranch land and was now mostly scrub brush and failing enterprises. Jack passed the Brenner place and saw Tom out working on a fence line. Tom raised his hand in a wave, and after a moment's hesitation, Jack waved back. It was such a small thing, that wave, but it felt significant, like a first step on a very long road. The veterinary clinic was on the south end of Hadleyville, a low building with faded blue siding and a parking lot that had seen better days. Jack pulled in next to a newer pickup, one that belonged to someone who was doing better than him. Someone who hadn't spent the last decade giving up. Inside, the clinic smelled like antiseptic and dog shampoo. The waiting room had the same chairs it had 10 years ago, the same outdated magazines on the corner table. Behind the reception desk sat a young man with kind eyes and a name tag that read Jesse. "Mr. Rawlins?" Jesse smiled. "You can bring Daisy right on back. Dr. Morrison's ready for you." Jack carried Daisy through the door, Jesse indicated, Scout following so close he nearly tripped Jack twice. The examination room was small and bright, and standing in the middle of it was a woman Jack hadn't seen in a decade. Dr. Ellen Morrison looked older. Her hair more grey than brown now, but her eyes were the same, sharp and compassionate in equal measure. She'd been the one to help Sarah pick out Daisy all those years ago, had given them advice on training and feeding and all the little details that came with a new puppy. "Jack Rawlins," she said, and her voice carried a weight of things unsaid. "It's been a long time." "Yes, ma'am," Jack said, setting Daisy gently on the examination table. "Too long, I expect." Dr. Morrison didn't push it. She just nodded and turned her attention to Daisy, her hands moving with practiced efficiency over the dog's body, checking the wound, testing the leg's range of motion, murmuring soothing words all the while. "Tell me what happened," she said, so Jack told her. About the irrigation ditch, the collapse, Scout's desperate barking. He kept his voice level and factual, but Dr. Morrison's eyes flickered to his torn, bloody hands more than once. "You dug her out yourself?" "Didn't have much choice." "You could have called for help." Jack didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, he had one, but saying it out loud, that he'd forgotten how to ask for help, that he'd spent so long alone he didn't think anyone would come, felt like more honesty than he could manage. Dr. Morrison cleaned the wound properly, applied some kind of antibiotic ointment, and wrapped Daisy's leg in clean white bandages. "She's going to be fine," she said finally. "The cut's not deep enough to need stitches, and the leg isn't broken. Keep her quiet for a week, change the bandage daily, and bring her back if you see any signs of infection." "Thank you," Jack said, and meant it more than the words could convey. Dr. Morrison washed her hands at the small sink, then turned back to him. "Jack, I'm going to say something, and I want you to know it comes from a place of genuine concern." Jack braced himself. "You look like hell." Despite everything, a laugh escaped him. Short and sharp, but real. "Can't argue with that. When's the last time you saw a doctor?" "For yourself, I mean." "Don't rightly remember," she sighed. "Your hands need attention too. At minimum, you should clean them properly and watch for infection. Preferably, you should let someone look at them." Jack glanced down at his torn, dirty fingers. "I'll manage. I know you will. You Rawlins types always do." She handed him a tube of antibiotic ointment. "For your hands. No charge. And Jack, I'm glad you called. I'm glad you came in." The words settled around him like a warm coat on a cold day. Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and gathered up Daisy. Scout was already at the door, ready to lead the way home. The drive back from Hadleyville felt different somehow, like Jack was seeing the landscape with new eyes. Or maybe old eyes, the ones he'd had before grief turned everything grey and indistinct. The late afternoon sun painted the hills in shades of gold and amber, and for the first time in years, Jack noticed it was beautiful. Daisy dozed in the passenger seat, her bandaged legs stretched out carefully. Scout had finally settled down in the back, his vigilance easing now that his mother was safe. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near Daisy's head, occasionally stroking the soft fur between her ears. He was almost home when he saw Tom Brenner's truck pulled over on the shoulder of the road, hood up. Tom bent over the engine with the particular stance of a man dealing with a problem that wasn't going to be easily solved. Jack's first instinct was to drive past, keep his head down, avoid the interaction, get home to the familiar safety of isolation. His foot stayed steady on the gas pedal for a full 3 seconds before something, maybe the memory of Dr. Morrison's kind eyes, maybe Scout's loyalty, maybe just exhaustion from carrying loneliness for so long, made him ease off and pull over behind Tom's truck. Tom straightened up when he heard Jack's truck, surprise clear on his weathered face. He was about Jack's age, maybe a year or two younger, with the kind of solid build that came from a lifetime of ranch work. They'd been good friends once, back when Sarah was alive, back when Jack still went to the occasional barbecue or town meeting. Jack! Tom wiped his hands on a rag, looking like he wasn't sure whether this was real or some kind of heat mirage. "That really you? Heard your truck was having trouble," Jack said, climbing out. Scout immediately jumped down and started investigating the roadside, but stayed close. "Alternator, I think." Tom shook his head. "She's been making noise for a week, but you know how it is. Always something." Jack did know. He looked at the engine, at the familiar puzzle of belts and wires and parts that could fail in a dozen different ways. Once upon a time, he could have diagnosed this problem in his sleep. Sarah used to tease him about it, said he spoke better to engines than he did to people. "Let me take a look," Jack heard himself say. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Jack testing connections and checking the belt tension while Tom held a flashlight, even though the sun was still plenty bright. It was the alternator, just like Tom suspected, and there wasn't much to be done about it on the side of the road. "You need a tow into town," Jack said finally. "Get it to Harmon's garage." "Yeah," Tom sighed. "Linda's going to have my hide. This is the 3rd time this month I've broken down somewhere. I can give you a lift home. Come back for the truck later." Tom looked at him for a long moment, and Jack could see the questions there, the curiosity about where Jack had been and why he was suddenly acting human again. But Tom was too good a man to push. "I'd appreciate that," Tom said. "Let me just grab my stuff." They loaded Tom's tools into Jack's truck bed, and Tom climbed into the back seat next to Scout, who immediately started trying to lick his face. Tom laughed, a genuine warm sound that made Jack remember what it felt like to have friends. "This the pup?" Tom asked, scratching Scout behind the ears. "He's gotten big. That's Scout, Daisy's boy." Jack gestured to the sleeping dog in the passenger seat. "Had a bit of an incident this morning. Just got back from the vet. She all right?" "Will be. Got trapped in the irrigation ditch when a section collapsed. Scout here wouldn't let it go until I came to help." Tom was quiet for a moment, taking that in. "Those old ditches are a hazard. I had to fill in half of mine last year before somebody got hurt. You need help with yours. I've got equipment and time." It was an offer, pure and simple, with no strings attached. The kind of offer neighbors made when they still acted like neighbors. Jack's throat tightened. "I might take you up on that," he said. Tom's property was only about 10 minutes from Jack's place. A well-maintained spread with fences that didn't sag and a barn that had fresh paint. Linda was out front working in her garden when they pulled up, and she stood when she saw Jack's truck, shading her eyes against the sun. "Tom Brenner, what did you do to the truck now?" she called, but there was affection in it. "Alternator," Tom called back. "Jack gave me a lift." Linda walked over, pulling off her gardening gloves. She was a small woman, with steel-grey hair and eyes that didn't miss much. "Jack Rawlins." "Been a while." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him, really looked at him, and Jack felt seen in a way that made him want to retreat. But she just nodded, like she understood things he hadn't said. "You staying for dinner?" she asked. "Got a roast in the oven, more than enough." Every instinct Jack had told him to decline, to make an excuse, to get back to the safety of his empty house. But Daisy was asleep in the truck. Scout was happy as could be getting attention from Tom. And the thought of another frozen dinner, eaten standing at the counter, suddenly felt unbearable. "If it's not too much trouble," Jack said. Linda smiled. "No trouble at all." Tom, help Jack get his dog settled somewhere comfortable. She looks like she's been through it. They set Daisy up on an old blanket in the Brenner's mudroom, where she could rest without being disturbed. Scout stayed with her, curling up as close as he could get, without actually lying on top of her. Jack washed his hands, really washed them, with soap and hot water and careful attention to the cuts Dr. Morrison had been worried about, and then found himself sitting at Linda and Tom's kitchen table. While she moved around the kitchen with easy efficiency, the house smelled like home cooking and coffee and life being lived. Tom got them both beers from the fridge, and they sat there not talking about anything important while Linda finished up the meal. It felt strange and familiar all at once, like putting on an old jacket and finding it still fit. "So what have you been up to?" Tom asked, and Jack knew he meant the last 10 years, all the time Jack had been a ghost. "Not much," Jack admitted. "Letting the ranch fall apart, mostly. Letting myself fall apart with it." The honesty surprised him. But maybe it was easier to say true things in someone else's kitchen, sitting across from someone who remembered you as you used to be. "That's grief," Linda said from the stove, her back to them, but her voice gentle. "It does what it does. No shame in it." "Maybe," Jack said. "But there's a difference between grieving and giving up. I've been doing the second one." "And now?" Tom asked. Jack thought about Daisy in the ditch, Scout's desperate barking, the way it felt to cry for the first time in years. "Now I'm trying to figure out how to stop." Dinner was pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs and reminded you that food could be more than just fuel. Linda served it family style, passing dishes around the table, and Jack found himself eating more than he had in months. They talked about small things, the drought, the price of feed, the new family that had moved into the old Peterson place. But mostly, they just sat together, 3 people sharing a meal, and that was enough. When Jack finally stood to leave, the sun had set and the sky was full of stars. Tom walked him out to the truck, where Scout was already waiting eagerly, and Daisy was blinking awake from her nap. "Jack," Tom said, his hand on the truck door, "I meant what I said about the irrigation ditches. And if you need help with anything else, fence work, roof repair, just another set of hands, you call me. All right?" Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. Tom stuck out his hand, and Jack shook it. The handshake was firm and real and felt like a promise being made on both sides. "It's good to have you back," Tom said. "I'm not sure I'm back yet," Jack admitted, "but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do." On the drive home, Jack kept one hand on Daisy's head and watched the road unwind in his headlights. The ranch appeared out of the darkness like it always did, but tonight it looked different. Not smaller or sadder, but like a problem with solutions. Like something that could be fixed if a man was willing to do the work. Inside, Jack settled both dogs on their blankets and then stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking at the phone on the wall. He picked it up, held it, then set it back down. Tomorrow he'd call the bank, work out a payment plan. Tomorrow he'd start making a list of everything that needed fixing. Tomorrow he'd begin the long work of rebuilding. But tonight he climbed the stairs and opened the nightstand drawer. He took out the cedar box, opened it, and looked at Sarah's ring. "I met with Tom and Linda tonight," he told the empty room. "First real conversation I've had in years. They asked about me. Really asked, like they cared." He paused, touching the ring gently with one finger. "I think Scout saved Daisy today, but I think maybe they both saved me too. And I think you'd be glad about that." He closed the box, but this time when he put it away, it didn't feel like shutting something off. It felt more like keeping something safe while he figured out how to live again. Jack woke up before dawn the next morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a decade. His body ached from yesterday's exertions. Hauling Daisy out of the ditch had used muscles he'd forgotten he had, but the pain felt earned rather than just the general erosion of time. He made coffee and drank it hot while standing at the kitchen window, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to pale gold. Both dogs were still asleep on their blankets, Daisy's sides rising and falling in steady rhythm. Scout pressed against her like a guardian. Jack found a notebook in the drawer, one of Sarah's old ones. her handwriting still visible on the first few pages where she'd made grocery lists and tracked appointments. He flipped to a clean page and started writing. The list grew longer than he'd anticipated. Irrigation ditches, inspect and repair all sections. North fence line, replace posts and wire. Bun roof, patch or replace shingles. House porch, reinforce boards. Cattle water troughs, clean and check for leaks. And that was just the immediate stuff, the things that would keep the ranch from falling apart completely. He was still writing when the phone rang. The sound startled him. Nobody called this early, and for a wild moment Jack thought maybe something had happened to Tom or Linda. Maybe his truck showing up at their place last night had somehow brought bad luck. But when he picked up the receiver, it was a voice he didn't recognize. Mr. Rawlins. "This is Patricia Chen from First National Bank." Jack's stomach dropped. "Yes, ma'am. I'm calling about your mortgage account. You're currently 3 months past due, and we need to discuss payment options before this moves to the next stage of collection." The next stage, foreclosure. Jack had known it was coming, had ignored the letters and the warnings, because acknowledging them would mean acknowledging everything else he'd been avoiding. "I understand," Jack said. "I can make a payment. Get caught up." "That's good to hear, Mr. Rawlins. The total amount due, including late fees, is $7,342. Can you arrange payment within the next 30 days? $7,000. Jack did quick math in his head. He had maybe $9,000 left in savings, the remains of what he and Sarah had built up over 30 years. Paying the bank would leave him almost nothing for operating expenses, for feed, for repairs. But losing the ranch would leave him with less than nothing. "Yes," he said. "I can do that. Wonderful. I'll note that in your file. Mr. Rawlins, I also want to let you know that we have programs for ranchers experiencing financial hardship. If you're interested, we could restructure your loan, possibly reduce your monthly payments." "I'll think about it," Jack said, which was more honesty than he'd offered the bank in years. "Thank you." He hung up and looked at his list. 7,000 to the bank, maybe 2,000 for the most critical repairs. That left nothing for the cattle operation, nothing for a buffer if something else went wrong. And something always went wrong. The smart thing would be to sell. Ranches like his were being bought up by developers or consolidated into larger operations. He could probably get enough to pay off the mortgage and have something left over for a small place in town, maybe even enough to live on for a few years. The thought made him feel hollowed out, but then Daisy stirred on her blanket, whimpered softly, and Scout was immediately alert, nosing at her to make sure she was all right. Jack watched them and thought about loyalty, about refusing to give up even when the situation looked hopeless. Scout hadn't abandoned his mother when she was trapped. He'd barked until someone heard him. Maybe Jack needed to do his own version of that. Keep barking, keep trying, keep asking for help when he needed it. He looked at the phone, then at the business card he'd saved from the veterinary clinic. Dr. Morrison had written her cell number on the back, along with a note, "Call if you need anything." "I mean it." Jack dialed before he could talk himself out of it. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Dr. Morrison, it's Jack Rawlins. I'm sorry to call so early. Is Daisy all right?" The immediate concern in her voice steadied him. "She's fine. This isn't about her. This is about—" He paused, searching for words. "This is about me being an idiot for a very long time and trying to figure out how to be less of one." There was a moment of silence, then a soft laugh. "That's quite a project." "What do you need, Jack?" "Advice, I guess. The ranch is falling apart. My finances are falling apart. I've got a list of repairs that would take 3 men 6 months, and I'm just one man with no money and no time. And I don't know where to start. Are you asking me because I'm a vet, or because I'm a person who knows you?" Jack thought about that. "The second one." "All right. Here's my advice. You start small. Pick one thing, the most important thing, and fix it. Then you pick another. You don't try to solve 10 years of neglect in a week. The most important thing is probably the irrigation system. Without water, the whole operation fails. Then that's where you start. And Jack, you said you're one man with no time, but you're not one man anymore. Tom Brenner would help you in a heartbeat. So would half the ranchers in this county if you'd just ask. After he hung up, Jack sat with that truth for a while. He'd spent so long thinking of himself as alone that he'd forgotten how to see the people around him who were waiting to help. Not because they pitied him, but because that's what neighbors did. What friends did. He changed Daisy's bandage the way Dr. Morrison had shown him, cleaning the wound gently and wrapping it in fresh gauze. The cut was healing well, no signs of infection. Scout supervised the whole process, only relaxing when Daisy licked Jack's hand to show she was all right. "You two are a team," Jack told them, "looking out for each other. That's how it should be." By 8 o'clock, Jack was out at the irrigation ditch where Daisy had been trapped. In the daylight, the damage looked even worse than he'd feared. This wasn't the only section that had collapsed. He could see cracks and sagging all along the line. Places where the old earthwork was giving way to time and drought and neglect. He started taking measurements, making notes, trying to calculate how much material he'd need and what it would cost. The numbers were daunting. Even if he did most of the work himself, the supplies alone would run several $1,000s. The sound of a truck engine made him look up. Tom Brenner's vehicle came bouncing across the pasture, and when it stopped, both Tom and Linda climbed out. "Heard you might need a hand," Tom said. Jack stared at them. "How did you—" "Dr. Morrison called Linda this morning," Linda said, walking over with a thermos of coffee and a bag that smelled like fresh biscuits. "Said you were taking on the irrigation system and could use some company." "I can't pay you," Jack said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "I can barely pay the bank." "Who said anything about paying?" Tom was already pulling tools out of his truck bed. "This is what neighbors do. You'd do the same for us, would he?" Jack wanted to think so, wanted to believe that somewhere under the grief and isolation, he was still the kind of man who helped when help was needed. Maybe that's what this was. Not just fixing ditches, but fixing himself enough to be that man again. They worked through the morning, the three of them moving along the irrigation line, shoring up weak sections, digging out collapsed areas, reinforcing the earthwork with wooden frames Tom had brought. Linda proved to be just as capable as the men, handling a shovel with practiced ease and offering suggestions about drainage that showed she'd been doing this kind of work her whole life. Around noon, Linda declared a break and produced sandwiches from somewhere, along with cold lemonade. They sat in the shade of Jack's truck, eating and talking about the work still to be done. "This section's the worst of it," Tom said, gesturing to the collapsed area where Daisy had been trapped. "But you've got at least 3 more weak spots that need attention before winter. Water freezes, expands, you'll have more collapses." "I know," Jack said. "I've known for years. Just kept putting it off." "Well, you're not putting it off anymore," Linda said firmly. "We'll be back tomorrow and the day after if needed. Between the 3 of us, we can get the worst of it handled." Jack wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could handle it himself, wanted to push them away before he got used to having people around again and then lost them too. But Scout chose that moment to trot over with a stick, dropping it at Linda's feet with his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook, and she laughed and threw it for him, and Jack realized that maybe being alone wasn't actually protecting him from anything. It was just making everything harder. "Thank you," he said, and meant it for more than just the ditch work. That evening, after Tom and Linda had gone home and Jack had fed the dogs and checked Daisy's leg again, he sat down with his notebook and revised his list. Next to each item, he added names. People who might help, resources he might tap, ways the work could be divided up and made manageable. It was still a daunting list, still more work than seemed possible. But for the first time in 10 years, Jack looked at it and saw possibility instead of just overwhelming defeat. He saw a ranch that could be saved, a life that could be rebuilt, a man who could maybe learn to live again instead of just existing. Outside, the sun was setting over land that had been in his family for 3 generations. Jack stood on the porch and watched the light fade. Scout pressed against his leg and Daisy resting nearby, and felt something he'd almost forgotten the shape of. Hope, small and fragile, but real. Tomorrow he'd call the bank and set up that payment. Tomorrow he'd work on the ditches with Tom and Linda. Tomorrow he'd take another step on this long road, back to being human. But tonight, he had dogs who depended on him and a ranch worth fighting for. And that was enough. The work on the irrigation system took 6 days. Tom and Linda came every morning like clockwork, and on the 3rd day they brought reinforcements. Carl Murphy from the neighboring spread, his son Danny, who was home from college for the summer, and old Pete Harrison, who must have been pushing 80, but could still swing a pickaxe better than men half his age. Jack tried to protest, tried to say it was too much, but Linda shut him down with a look that reminded him of Sarah when she'd made up her mind about something. People want to help. Jack let them, so he did. He let them come, let them work, let them bring food and conversation and life back to a ranch that had been silent for too long. And slowly, section by section, the irrigation system began to take shape again. Reinforced walls, clear channels, water flowing the way it was meant to. Daisy was healing too. By the end of the first week, she was putting weight on her injured leg, following Scout around the yard, with something approaching her old energy. Jack changed her bandage every evening, talking to her while he worked, telling her about the day's progress like she was a foreman, supervising the whole operation. "Got the south section finished today," he said, wrapping the clean gauze carefully around her leg. "Tom thinks we can tackle the north section tomorrow. Shore it up before any more rain comes. If any rain comes. Weather forecast isn't promising, but you never know." Scout sat nearby, watching the process with his usual attentive intensity. The pup had barely left his mother's side since the accident, and Jack found himself grateful for that loyalty. It reminded him of what mattered, what was worth fighting for. On the 7th day, Jack woke to the sound of voices outside. He looked out the bedroom window and saw not just Tom and Linda's truck, but 5 others parked in his driveway. People were unloading tools, coolers, what looked like enough lumber to build a small house. He dressed quickly and went outside, where Tom was organizing the crowd like a general deploying troops. "Morning, Jack," Tom said cheerfully. "Hope you don't mind, but we figured while we're at it, we might as well tackle that barn roof, and maybe reinforce the porch while we're at it." Jack looked at the gathered neighbors. Some he recognized, some he didn't, all of them giving up their Saturday to fix a ranch that belonged to a man who'd shut them out for a decade. His throat closed up with emotion. He had to stop, clear his throat, try again. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help us get started," Linda said, pressing a cup of coffee into his hands. "And maybe that you'll make sure your dogs don't steal all the sandwiches." It became something like a barn raising. The kind of community event Jack remembered from his childhood, but thought had died out in modern times. People worked in teams, some on the roof, some on the porch, some finishing the last sections of the irrigation ditches. Linda and 2 other women set up a lunch station in the shade, keeping everyone fed and hydrated. Jack worked alongside Tom on the barn roof, pulling off damaged shingles and hammering down new ones. The work was hot and hard, and his shoulders burned with the effort, but it felt good, felt real, felt like building something instead of just watching things fall apart. "You know," Tom said around noon, wiping sweat from his forehead, "Sarah would be proud of you." Jack paused, hammer in hand. "I don't know about that. She'd probably be pretty disappointed it took me this long to get my act together." "Maybe, but she'd also see you now, actually doing the work, actually letting people in. That would mean something to her. She was always better at that than me. The people part. I was good with the land, with the cattle, with things I could fix with my hands. But people," Jack shook his head. "That was her gift. You're doing all right now." Jack looked down at the yard, where Danny Murphy was throwing a stick for Scout, while Daisy watched from her spot in the shade. Carl was showing Pete something on his phone, both of them laughing. Linda was organizing the lunch setup with the kind of efficient kindness that made everyone around her feel cared for. "I'm trying," Jack said. "Some days that's all I've got. Some days that's all any of us have got." By the time the sun started its descent, the barn had a new roof, the porch had been reinforced, and the irrigation system was as solid as it had been in Jack's grandfather's day. People started packing up tools and loading trucks. Tired but satisfied with the day's work, Jack stood in the middle of his yard, trying to figure out how to thank them all, how to put into words what this meant. In the end, he just said it plain. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve all of you coming here and spending your day fixing my mistakes. But I'm grateful. More grateful than I know how to say. You'd do the same for any of us, Carl said, and the others nodded agreement. I hope that's true, Jack said. I hope I'm still that person or can be again. You are, Linda said firmly. You're just remembering it, that's all. After everyone left, Jack walked the property with both dogs at his side. The barn roof gleamed with new shingles. The porch felt solid underfoot. The irrigation ditches ran clear and strong. It was more than he could have accomplished in months working alone, done in a single day by people who cared enough to help. He ended up at the back pasture, where Daisy had been trapped a week ago. The collapsed section was reinforced now, built stronger than it had been originally. Scouts sniffed around the area with curiosity, but Daisy stayed close to Jack, like she remembered and didn't want to get too close to where she'd been hurt. It's okay, girl, Jack said, kneeling down to stroke her head. That section won't hurt you again. Won't hurt anyone? It's fixed now. Fixed. The word carried more weight than it should. The ditch was fixed, the barn was fixed, the porch was fixed. But what about him? Was he fixed? Or just patched up temporarily, one crisis away from falling apart again? The doubt crept in as the sun set, settling over him like an old familiar blanket. It was easier to slide back into isolation, easier to shut down than to keep feeling things, keep trying, keep risking the kind of pain that came with caring. He thought about Sarah, about the ring in the box on his nightstand, about 30 years of marriage and partnership and love that had ended in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. It had taken him 3 years to pack up her things, 7 more to stop checking the driveway for her truck, and he still sometimes set 2 coffee cups out in the morning before catching himself. That kind of loss didn't heal. It just became part of you, a weight you carried, until carrying it was all you knew. I'm scared, Jack said to the empty pasture, to the dogs, to Sarah's memory, to God or the universe or whoever might be listening. I'm scared that I'll let people back in and then lose them too. I'm scared that this feeling, this hope won't last. I'm scared that I'm not strong enough to keep doing this. Scout pressed against his leg, solid and warm and real. Daisy leaned into his other side, her weight a reminder that she was here, alive, saved because Jack had chosen to act instead of ignore the call for help. Maybe that was enough. Maybe strength wasn't about never being scared or never doubting. Maybe it was about doing the work anyway, about showing up even when it felt easier to hide, about taking care of the things that depended on you, even when you didn't know if you had anything left to give. Jack stood there until the stars came out, his hands resting on the dogs' heads, and made a decision. He'd keep trying, keep fixing things, keep letting people help. And if it hurt, if it all fell apart again, at least he'd have tried. At least he wouldn't have spent the rest of his life wondering what might have been if he'd just had the courage to live again. Inside the house, he made dinner, a real dinner, not just something from the freezer, but actual food that required effort and attention. He sat at the table instead of standing at the counter. He washed the dishes and put them away properly. Small things, but they mattered. Before bed, he opened the nightstand drawer and took out the cedar box. But tonight, instead of just looking at the ring and feeling the weight of loss, he picked it up and held it in his palm. The metal was warm from being stored in the box, and it caught the lamplight in a way that made it seem almost alive. I miss you, he said. Every single day I miss you. But I think I'm finally figuring out that missing you doesn't mean I have to stop living. I think maybe you'd want me to keep going, to fix what's broken, to let people help me and help them back. He put the ring back carefully, but this time when he closed the drawer, it felt less like shutting something away and more like keeping something precious safe. Tomorrow the bank draft would go through, clearing his debt, but leaving his savings almost empty. Tomorrow, he'd need to start thinking about how to make the ranch profitable again, how to rebuild not just the physical structures but the whole operation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new doubts and new opportunities to either give up or keep going. But tonight, He had a house that didn't feel quite so empty, dogs who trusted him, and neighbors who'd shown him that community wasn't dead. It was just waiting for him to remember he was part of it. That was something. Maybe it was everything. The bank draft cleared on Monday morning, and Jack felt the weight of it settle into his bones. $9,000 in savings, reduced to less than $1,500 in a single transaction. He'd kept the ranch from foreclosure, but he'd also put himself in a position where one bad month, one unexpected expense, could undo everything. He was going through the mail on Tuesday, mostly junk, a few bills, when he found an envelope from Patricia Chen at the bank. His first thought was that something had gone wrong with the payment, that he'd made some mistake and they were calling the loan anyway. But when he opened it, he found a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Mr. Rawlins, your account shows a secondary savings account under your wife's name. Last accessed in 2014. The account contains $24,750. I thought you should be aware. Please call at your convenience to discuss access." Patricia Chenjak read it 3 times. A secondary account. $24,000. Sarah's name. He called the bank immediately, his hands shaking as he dialed. "Ms. Chen, this is Jack Rawlins. I got your note." "Ah, yes. I'm glad you called. The account was set up as a joint account, so you have full access to it. It's just been sitting dormant. I wasn't sure if you knew about it." "I didn't. Sarah handled most of the finances. After she died, He couldn't finish the sentence. "After she died, he'd stopped paying attention to anything that wasn't immediately necessary. The account has been earning interest," Ms. Chen continued. "Very modest interest, but it's grown a little over the years. Would you like me to transfer it to your primary account?" "Yes, please. And Ms. Chen, thank you for finding this, for caring enough to let me know." "Of course, Mr. Rawlins. I'll process the transfer today." After he hung up, Jack sat at the kitchen table in a daze. $24,000. Money that had been there all along, waiting for him to look for it. Money that would have saved him years of worry and debt if he'd just bothered to check, to go through the accounts properly, instead of just letting everything slide. But why had Sarah set it up separately? He tried to remember if she'd ever mentioned it, but his memory from those final months was fragmented, full of holes where grief had eaten through the fabric of daily life. The answer might be in her papers. Jack had packed them all away after her death, put the boxes in the attic, because going through them felt like reopening a wound that would never heal. But if there was an explanation, it would be there. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, then pulled down the attic ladder. The space was hot and dusty, full of boxes and old furniture, and the accumulated debris of 3 generations of Rawlins family history. Sarah's boxes were in the corner, labeled in her neat handwriting, financial records, personal papers, photos. Jack pulled down the box marked personal papers and carried it downstairs. Scout and Daisy watched with interest as he set it on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were files organized by year. Letters from friends and family, birthday cards Jack had given her, postcards from the one big trip they'd taken to Yellowstone. And at the bottom, a manila envelope with his name written on it in Sarah's handwriting. His hands trembled as he picked it up. The envelope was sealed, and across the seal Sarah had written, "For Jack, when you're ready." He opened it carefully, like something precious might break if he moved too fast. Inside was a letter, several pages actually, in Sarah's familiar script. "My dearest Jack, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know that sounds dramatic, but Dr. Harrison was very clear about my prognosis, and I'm not one to avoid reality. So I'm writing this now, while I still can, because there are things you need to hear, and I won't be around to tell you in person. First, I love you. I have loved you since the day we met at the county fair, when we were both too young to know what love really meant. I've loved you through every hard season and every good harvest, through every argument and every reconciliation, through all the dreams we chased and the ones we had to let go. 30 years wasn't enough, but it was beautiful, and I'm grateful for every single day. Second, I know you, Jack Rawlins. I know you're going to try to shut down when I'm gone. You're going to push everyone away and work yourself into the ground and pretend that if you just keep busy enough, the grief won't catch you. I know this because it's what you did when your father died and what you tried to do when we lost the baby, and I won't be there to pull you back this time. So I'm doing what I can now. The money in the separate account, I saved it over the years from selling eggs and vegetables at the farmer's market, from that small inheritance from my aunt, from little bits here and there. It's meant for the ranch, for repairs and emergencies, and keeping the place going when things get hard. I didn't tell you about it because I knew you'd want to use it for my medical bills, and I didn't want that. This money is for after. For the ranch, I know you're going to let fall apart when you stop caring, but here's the thing, my love. I need you to start caring again. Not right away. Take your time, grieve, let yourself feel all of it. But eventually, when the worst of it has passed, I need you to remember that life doesn't stop just because I'm not in it anymore. The ranch is your family's legacy. The land has been Rawlins' land for 70 years. Don't let it die with me, and please, please don't shut out our friends. Tom and Linda will try to help you, let them. Carl and Pete and all the others. They care about you, not just because you're my husband, but because you're a good man and a good neighbor. Or you were, before grief tried to convince you otherwise. Be that man again when you can. I'm also leaving letters hidden around the ranch. Not many, just a few in places that matter. You'll find them when you're supposed to, when you're doing the work of living again. Each one has something I want you to know, something I wish I could tell you in person. This first one is just to say, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be angry and lost and broken, but it's not okay to stay that way forever. At some point you have to choose to live again. Choose the ranch. Choose your friends. Choose Daisy. She's going to need you when I'm gone. And choose yourself, Jack. Choose to believe that life can still be good even when it's different from what we planned. I'll be watching over you, my love. I'll be in the sunrise over the east pasture and the sound of rain on the barn roof and the way the wind moves through the cottonwood trees. I'll be in every good thing you do and every fence you mend and every time you let someone help you instead of trying to carry everything alone. Live. Jack, for both of us, all my love, forever and always. Sarah P.S. The next letter is in the barn, behind the third support beam from the east door, tucked into the space where the wood doesn't quite meet the wall. You'll know when you're ready to look for it. Jack read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face before he could even begin to process what it meant. Sarah had known. She'd known exactly what he would do, how he would fall apart. How he would spend years in exactly the kind of isolation she'd warned against, and she'd left him a way back. The money wasn't the important part, though it was a gift that might save the ranch. The important part was the knowledge that Sarah had seen him, truly seen him, and loved him enough to try to pull him back to life even after she was gone. He looked at the date on the letter. She'd written it 3 weeks before she died, when she could barely hold a pen without shaking from the medication and the pain. She'd used what little strength she had left to do this, to reach across death and remind him that he was meant to live. Scout whined and pressed his nose against Jack's hand. Daisy limped over and rested her head on his knee. Both dogs looked at him with concern, like they could sense the earthquake of emotion working its way through his chest. She knew, Jack told them. She knew I'd mess this up. Knew I'd shut down and stop living and let everything fall apart. And she tried to help me anyway. He stood up, carefully folding the letter and putting it back in its envelope. Then he walked out to the barn, the dogs following close behind. The third support beam from the east door was easy to find, and when he ran his hand along the space where the wood met the wall, his fingers touched paper. Another envelope. Another letter, but Jack didn't open it right away. He stood there in the barn that now had a solid roof thanks to neighbors who cared, on a ranch that was slowly coming back to life, with dogs who had somehow managed to pull him out of a decade of grief. And he understood something he should have understood years ago. Sarah hadn't just left him money. She'd left him a map back to himself, a trail of breadcrumbs that would only make sense when he was ready to follow them. And the first letter, the one he'd found today, 10 years too late, was her way of saying she'd forgiven him for taking so long to get here. He looked down at the envelope in his hand, at his name, written in Sarah's handwriting, and made a decision. He'd read the second letter tonight, and then he'd keep working, keep fixing, keep living. Not just because Sarah had asked him to, but because Scout and Daisy had shown him that loyalty and love were worth fighting for. Because Tom and Linda and all the others had reminded him that community mattered. Because the ranch was worth saving, and so was he. The twist wasn't that Sarah had left him money. The twist was that she'd never really left him at all. She'd been here all along, waiting for him to be ready to hear her, to accept her final gift, permission to grieve, and then to live. Jack walked back to the house with both dogs at his side, the second letter tucked carefully in his pocket, and felt something shift inside his chest. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it wasn't the only thing anymore. There was room now for hope, for purpose, for the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today, and that, more than any amount of money, was what Sarah had really left him. Jack waited until after dinner to read the second letter. He'd spent the afternoon in a strange state, not quite happy, not quite sad, but something in between, aware, present, like someone had turned up the volume on the world after years of it being muted. He fed the dogs, watched Daisy move around the kitchen with barely a limp left in her gait, saw Scout bring her his favorite toy and drop it at her feet in offering. The simple domesticity of it felt sacred somehow, like these were the moments Sarah had wanted him to see and cherish. When the sun started to set, Jack took the envelope out to the porch. The evening was cool, a breeze coming down from the mountains carrying the smell of sage and possibility. He sat in the old rocking chair, Sarah's chair, the one he hadn't sat in since she died, and opened the letter. My dearest Jack, if you're reading this, it means you found the first letter, and you're still moving forward. I'm proud of you. I know how hard it is, and I know that just getting to this point took more courage than you think you have. But that's the thing about courage. You don't know you have it until you need it. This letter is about the ranch and what it could be. Not what it was, not what we dreamed it might become, but what it could be now in whatever future you're building without me. The irrigation system. I know it needs work. By the time you're reading this, it's probably in terrible shape. Fix it, Jack. Not because the ranch needs water, though it does, but because that system was your grandfather's legacy. He dug those ditches by hand during the Depression, and they kept this family alive when everything else was failing. Honor that. Honor him. The cattle operation can't sustain itself the way it used to. The drought has changed everything, and holding on to old methods just because they worked once is foolishness. I've been researching, yes, even while sick I was thinking about this ranch. And there are programs for sustainable ranching, for drought-resistant practices, for diversifying income. The Extension Office has information. Tom Brenner knows people. Ask for help. But here's what I really want you to understand. The ranch doesn't have to be what it was to be worth saving. It can evolve. You can raise different stock or lease grazing land, or even turn part of it into something completely new. What matters isn't preserving the past exactly as it was. What matters is honoring the spirit of it, family, hard work, land that's cared for and cares for us in return. I also want you to think about partnership. You've always been the kind of man who shoulders burdens alone, who thinks asking for help is a weakness. It's not. Tom would partner with you in a heartbeat if you asked. So would Carl or any number of the other ranchers who respect you and what you've built here. Don't let pride keep you isolated. There's money now. You found the account, or you wouldn't have found this letter. Use it wisely, not to maintain what's dying, but to invest in what could grow. New wells, better fencing, drought-resistant feed, maybe even solar panels for the barn. Think future, not past. I wish I could be there to help you plan it all out, to argue with you about priorities and make you see reason when you get stubborn. But I trust you, Jack. I trust that when you're ready, you'll make the right choices. You'll build something sustainable and good. And please, please, please take care of yourself in all this. You're not 25 anymore. Hire help when you need it. Take breaks. Eat real food, not just whatever's fastest. Go to the doctor for regular checkups. I won't be there to nag you about these things, so you have to do it yourself. The next letter is in the attic, in the box marked Photos. It's taped to the underside of the lid. You'll know when you're ready for it. I love you, my stubborn, wonderful man. Build something beautiful. All my love, Sarah. Jack read the letter twice, his mind already working through the implications. Sarah had been right about everything. The irrigation system, the drought, the need to adapt. She'd seen the future of the ranch more clearly than he had, and she'd tried to point him toward it even while dying. He thought about Tom's offer to help with the ditches, about the community workday that had accomplished more than Jack could have managed in months alone. Partnership. Not because he couldn't do it himself, but because doing it together made it better, stronger, more sustainable. The next morning, Jack drove into town with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. His first stop was the county extension office, where a young woman named Maria Rodriguez greeted him with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners. "Mr. Rawlins, I've been hoping you'd come in. Your wife contacted us years ago about sustainable ranching programs, and we've been holding information for you." She pulled out a file, Sarah's name on the tab, filled with papers about drought-resistant cattle breeds, rotational grazing systems, water conservation techniques, even information about agritourism and farm-to-table partnerships. She was very thorough, Maria said. "Made me promise to be ready if you ever came in asking for help." Jack looked through the papers, seeing Sarah's handwriting in the margins, notes she'd made, questions she'd wanted to ask, ideas she'd been developing even while fighting cancer. The evidence of her planning, her hope that he would eventually find his way here, made his throat tight. "I'd like to learn about all of this," he said. "Whatever programs are available, whatever help you can offer, I'm ready to listen." Maria's smile could have lit up the whole county. "Let's start with the drought-resistant grazing program. It's designed specifically for operations like yours. They spent 2 hours going through options." Jack learned about native grass restoration, about cattle breeds that thrived in arid conditions, about rainwater collection systems and solar-powered wells. The initial costs were high, but with Sarah's saved money and some low-interest loans designed for sustainable agriculture, it was possible. More than possible, it was a plan. His second stop was Tom Brenner's place. He found Tom in the machine shed, working on a tractor that had seen better days. "Jack." Tom straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you by?" "A proposition," Jack said, "and probably a conversation that's about 10 years overdue." They sat on hay bales in the barn, drinking coffee from Tom's thermos, while Jack laid it out. The irrigation system was fixed, but the ranch still needed work. He had some money now, enough to make investments, but not enough to do everything that needed doing. He needed help. Real help, the kind that came with partnership and shared responsibility. "I'm thinking we could combine some operations," Jack said. "Your spread and mine, we're adjacent, and we've both got the same problems. Drought, aging infrastructure, not enough hands to do all the work. What if we pooled resources, shared equipment, coordinated our grazing, maybe even went in together on some of these new, sustainable practices?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, and Jack felt the old fear creeping in, the fear of rejection, of being told he'd waited too long, asked for too much. But then Tom grinned. "Took you long enough to figure that out? I've been hoping you'd come around to this idea for years." "You have. Jack, you're a good rancher. Always have been. But you've been trying to do everything alone, and that doesn't work anymore. Maybe it did in your grandfather's time, but the world's changed. We need each other." They shook on it right there, and Jack felt another piece of his isolation crack away. This was what Sarah had wanted, not for him to save the ranch alone, but to build something better with the people who cared about the same land, the same way of life. Over the next week, Jack and Tom worked out the details. They'd start small, Shared equipment purchases, coordinated grazing schedules, joint participation in the sustainable ranching program. If it worked, they'd expand. Maybe bring in Carl or Pete. Create a cooperative that could weather storms that would break any one of them individually. Jack also made appointments. One with the doctor for a physical he probably should have had years ago. Another with a financial advisor to help him manage Sarah's saved money wisely. He hired Danny Murphy for part-time work, giving the kid experience and himself an extra set of hands for the heavy labor. But the most important thing he did was return to the attic. The box marked "Photos" was where Sarah said it would be. Jack carried it downstairs and opened it at the kitchen table, with both dogs watching curiously. Inside were years of memories, photos of their wedding, of the ranch in its early days, of cattle drives and harvests and quiet moments that had seemed ordinary at the time, but now felt precious. And taped to the underside of the lid, just as Sarah had promised, was another envelope. Jack's hands were steadier this time when he opened it. He was ready for whatever she had to tell him, ready to hear her voice through the words she'd written in those final weeks of her life. My dearest Jack, if you're reading this, you've made real progress. You've sought help, made plans, started to build something new. I'm so proud of you I could burst, even if I'm not there to see it. This letter is about forgiveness. Not forgiving me, I don't think I need that. But forgiving yourself. You're going to blame yourself for a lot of things, my love. For not fixing the ranch sooner, for not being able to save me. For the years you spent shut down and isolated. For every mistake and missed opportunity and moment of weakness, I need you to let that go. You did the best you could with what you had. You grieved the way you needed to grieve. And now you're doing the work of living again. And that's all anyone can ask. That's all I ever wanted for you. Forgive yourself for being human. Forgive yourself for hurting. Forgive yourself for taking time to heal. And when you've done that, I need you to do something else. I need you to open your heart to the possibility of happiness again. Not the same happiness we had, that's gone, and trying to recreate it would only bring pain, but a different kind of happiness. The kind that comes from good work, from friendships, from watching the sunrise and knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Maybe someday, if you're very lucky, you might even find love again. I know that thought probably makes you angry right now, or sad, or both. But Jack, I don't want you to be alone forever. I want you to have companionship, partnership, someone to share the load and the joys and the quiet evenings. If that happens, don't feel guilty about it. I'll be cheering you on. There's one more letter, but you're not ready for it yet. You'll know when you are. It's in the place that mattered most to both of us, waiting for when the time is right. Until then, keep working, keep healing, keep letting people in. You're doing so well, my love. Better than you know. All my love, always. Sarah. Jack sat with the letter for a long time, letting the words sink in. Forgiveness. He'd spent 10 years punishing himself for not being able to save her, for surviving when she didn't, for every failure, real and imagined. And Sarah, even dying, had tried to release him from that burden. The afternoon light was fading when Jack finally stood and walked to the window. Outside, Scout was chasing butterflies while Daisy supervised from the shade. Fully healed now, back to being the patient, wise presence she'd always been. The barn roof gleamed with new shingles. The irrigation ditches ran clear and strong. The land looked cared for in a way it hadn't in years. This was what Sarah had wanted. Not perfection, but effort. Not a recreation of the past, but a bridge to the future. She'd left him a roadmap, and he'd finally started following it. Jack looked down at the letter one more time. At the mention of a final letter in the place that mattered most. He knew where that was, had known the moment he read the words. But Sarah was right. He wasn't ready yet, but he would be. Soon. 3 weeks after reading Sarah's third letter, Jack stood at the fence line of the east pasture, looking out at the cottonwood grove, where he and Sarah had been married 40 years ago. The place that mattered most. He'd known from the moment he read those words where the final letter would be, but he'd been putting off the visit, afraid of what it might stir up. afraid that going there would undo all the progress he'd made. But this morning felt different. The ranch was in better shape than it had been in a decade. The partnership with Tom was working. They'd just gone in together on a new well system that would serve both properties. Daisy was fully healed, running around with Scout like a dog half her age. And Jack had started sleeping through the night, without waking up from dreams of hospital rooms and goodbye conversations that never felt finished. He was ready. Scout trotted ahead through the tall grass, nose to the ground, tracking whatever sense told the story of this place. Daisy followed more sedately, staying close to Jack like she understood this was important. Like she remembered Sarah too. The cottonwood grove sat in a natural depression where underground water kept the trees green even in the driest years. It was the prettiest spot on the ranch, shaded and peaceful, with a view of the mountains to the west. They'd chosen it for their wedding because Sarah said it felt like the land itself was blessing them. Jack's father had built the small platform they'd stood on, and some of the old decorations, weathered ribbons and a faded banner, still hung from the trees like ghosts of celebration. Jack hadn't been here since the funeral. He'd scattered half of Sarah's ashes here, in the place where they'd promised to love each other for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parted them. The other half he'd buried in the town cemetery, under a proper headstone. Because it seemed like she should be in both places, the land she'd loved and the community she'd been part of. The platform was still there, though the wood had gone grey with age and weather. Jack stepped onto it carefully, testing the boards before putting his full weight down. They held. Everything Sarah had built, everything she'd touched, seemed to hold longer and stronger than it had any right to. He knew where to look. At the back of the platform, where it met the largest cottonwood, there was a small gap between the boards and the tree trunk. Sarah had hidden things there when they were first married, love notes, small gifts, surprises for him to find. It was their secret spot, known only to the two of them. Jack knelt down, his knees protesting the position, and reached into the gap. His fingers touched paper almost immediately, and he pulled out an envelope sealed against the weather in a plastic bag. The last letter. He sat on the edge of the platform with his back against the cottonwood, Daisy settling beside him and Scout investigating the perimeter of the grove. The envelope shook in his hands as he opened it, and he realized he was afraid, not of what Sarah might say, but of this being the end. The last time he'd hear her voice, even through written words. My dearest, dearest Jack, if you're reading this, you've come to our spot. The place where we promised to build a life together, and then did it. 40 years doesn't seem like enough, does it? I could live 100 years with you and it wouldn't feel like enough, but here we are. You're there reading this, and I'm wherever I am now. I hope it's somewhere I can still see you, still watch over you, still love you across whatever distance separates us. This last letter isn't about the ranch or plans or practical things. This is about us and what we meant to each other, and what I need you to understand before you can really move forward. Jack, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. From that first day at the county fair when you tripped over your own feet trying to talk to me, to the last time you held my hand in that hospital room, every moment with you was a gift. Even the hard times, even the arguments and the disappointments and the dreams that didn't come true. All of it mattered because we did it together. I know you think you failed me somehow, that you should have seen the cancer earlier, or gotten me to better doctors, or found some way to save me. But Jack, there was no saving me. The cancer was always going to win that fight. What you did was give me 30 good years before it, and you made my final months bearable by being exactly who you've always been, steady, loving, present. You didn't fail me. You loved me, and that was everything. Now I need you to do something for me. I need you to take all that love, all that loyalty, all that fierce devotion you gave to me, and turn it toward your own life. Love the ranch the way you loved me, with commitment and care and the willingness to do hard work. Love your friends and your community the same way. Let people in, build connections, create new memories. And Jack, this is the hard part. I need you to let me go, not forget me. Never that. I want to live in your memories, in the stories you tell, in the way you see the sunrise and remember all the mornings we watched it together. But I don't want to be an anchor holding you in place. I don't want my death to define the rest of your life. You're only 62. You could have another 20 or 30 good years ahead of you. That's too long to spend grieving, too long to spend alone. I want you to live those years fully, joyfully, with purpose and connection, and maybe even love. If you meet someone who makes you happy, don't hold back because you think it betrays my memory. It doesn't. It honors everything we built together by showing that you still believe love is worth the risk. I release you, my love, from grief, from guilt, from the burden of carrying me with you everywhere you go. I'll always be part of you, but I don't need to be all of you. Live. Please. Please live. There's something else I need to tell you. Something I never got to say properly because the end came faster than we expected. I forgive you for everything you think you did wrong. For the times you were too busy with the ranch to give me attention. For the arguments we had that seem so small now. For not being perfect because nobody is. And I'm sorry too. Sorry I'm leaving you. Sorry I won't be there for all the years ahead. Sorry you have to do this hard work of grieving and healing and rebuilding, but I'm not sorry for our life together. Not for one single moment of it. So here's what I want you to do. When you finish reading this, I want you to spend some time here, in our spot. Remember the good things. Let yourself feel all of it, the love and the loss and everything in between. And then, I want you to stand up, walk back to the house with those beautiful dogs of yours, and start your life again. Not our life. Your life. Make it a good one, Jack. Make it count. And know that wherever I am, I'm cheering you on, proud of every step you take. I love you. I will always love you. Now go love your life the way you loved me. All my heart. Forever. Sarah Jack read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face before he could even begin to process the magnitude of what she was giving him, permission, release, the blessing to move forward without the weight of guilt and grief dragging him down. He sat there for a long time, the letter in his hands, and let himself feel everything. The love they'd shared, the life they'd built, the pain of losing her, the long years of isolation, and finally, the possibility of something beyond just survival. Scout came over and pressed against his side, and Jack wrapped an arm around the dog, grateful for the solid warmth of him. Daisy moved closer too, resting her head on his knee, and they sat there together in the grove, where Jack had promised to love Sarah forever, and he would. That promise didn't end just because she was gone. But Sarah's final gift was showing him that loving her forever didn't mean stopping living. It meant carrying that love forward into whatever came next, using it as fuel for rebuilding, for connection, for hope. Jack stood up slowly, his joints stiff from sitting. He looked around the grove, at the cottonwoods swaying in the breeze, at the platform where they'd stood so young and full of dreams, at the mountains rising in the distance. "Thank you," he said to the air, to Sarah's memory, to whatever part of her might still be listening. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. Thank you for the letters, for the money, for thinking ahead when I couldn't think past the next day. Thank you for everything." The breeze picked up, rustling through the cottonwood leaves with a sound like whispered conversation. Jack chose to take it as an answer. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket with the others. All 4 of them. The roadmap Sarah had left him, proof that love didn't end with death, it just changed shape. He'd keep them safe, read them when he needed reminding, but he wouldn't let them become another anchor holding him in the past. Scout barked once, sharp and insistent, ready to head back. Daisy was already on her feet, tail wagging gently. They were right. It was time to go home. Jack took one last look at the grove, committing it to memory, not as a place of grief, but as a place of promise. This was where his life with Sarah had begun, and in a way, where his life without her was beginning too. He walked back across the pasture with both dogs ranging ahead, and with every step, he felt lighter. Not because the grief was gone, it would never be truly gone, but because he'd finally accepted what Sarah had been trying to tell him all along. Grief and life weren't opposites. You could hold both, honor both, live fully while still carrying loss. The trick was not letting the grief become the whole story. By the time he reached the house, the sun was high and bright. Jack stood on the porch, the reinforced, solid porch his neighbors had built, and looked out at his ranch. The barn with its new roof, the irrigation ditches running clear, the fields that would soon hold drought-resistant native grasses, the partnership with Tom that made all of it sustainable. This was what Sarah had wanted him to build. Not a monument to the past, but a living, working ranch that could carry forward into the future. And he'd done it. With help, with struggle, with 2 dogs who'd refused to let him give up, but he'd done it. Jack went inside and pulled out his notebook, the one where he'd been keeping his lists and plans. He flipped to a new page and wrote at the top, "What's next?" The list came easier than he expected. Finish the native grass restoration project. Work with Tom on the new well system. Hire Danny full-time for the summer. Start planning the fall cattle rotation. Maybe look into that agritourism program Maria had mentioned. People paid good money to experience ranch life, and the extra income could help stabilize things. And at the bottom of the list, he added one more thing: live. Just that. A reminder that all the plans and projects and work were in service of actually living, not just surviving. The phone rang, and Jack answered it without the old hesitation. "Jack, it's Linda. Tom and I are heading into Hadleyville for supplies. Want to come along? We can grab lunch at the diner." 6 months ago, Jack would have declined, would have found an excuse to stay isolated, to avoid connection. But that man was gone, or at least fading, replaced by someone who understood that living meant showing up, participating, being part of the world. "I'd like that," Jack said. "Give me 20 minutes to get cleaned up." "See you soon," Linda said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Jack hung up and looked at the 2 dogs watching him expectantly. "You 2 hold down the fort," he told them. "I'll be back this afternoon." Scout wagged his tail. Daisy settled onto her blanket with the air of a queen, claiming her throne. They'd be fine. Everything would be fine. Jack grabbed his hat and his wallet, paused at the door to look back at the house that had felt like a tomb for so long and now felt like a home again, and stepped out into the bright afternoon. Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Make it a good one. Jack, make it count. He intended to do exactly that. The lunch at the diner turned into something more than just a meal. Tom and Linda invited Carl and his wife Margaret, and before Jack knew it, there were 6 of them crowded into a booth, talking and laughing, like this was something they did every week. The conversation flowed easily, updates on various ranches, gossip about the new family that had moved to town, speculation about whether the drought would finally break this year. Jack found himself contributing, offering opinions, even making a joke that got real laughs. It felt good. Strange, but good. After lunch, as they were walking to their trucks, Tom pulled Jack aside. "There's something I wanted to run by you," Tom said. "Remember I mentioned the sustainable ranching cooperative idea? Well, Carl and Pete are interested. So is Maria Rodriguez from the Extension Office. We're thinking of having a meeting next week to talk it through properly." "A cooperative," Jack said slowly, testing the word. "Like a formal arrangement?" "Exactly. Shared equipment, bulk purchasing, coordinated marketing. Some of the bigger operations out in Montana have been doing it for years." Makes everyone stronger, Jack thought about it. 6 months ago, the idea of tying himself to other people's decisions, of being part of something bigger than just his own ranch, would have felt suffocating. But now it felt like possibility. "Count me in," he said. Tom's grin was genuine and warm. "I was hoping you'd say that. Linda's already planning to make it a potluck. You know how she is." On the drive home, Jack found himself thinking about community, about how he'd spent a decade treating it like something to avoid rather than something to build. Sarah had understood what he was too stubborn to see, that isolation didn't protect you from pain. It just guaranteed you'd face everything alone. He pulled into his driveway and was surprised to see an unfamiliar car parked near the house, Dr. Morrison's vehicle. His first thought was panic. Something had happened to Daisy or Scout. But then he saw her sitting on the porch steps, Both dogs sprawled contentedly beside her. "Dr. Morrison," Jack said, climbing out of his truck. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she assured him, standing up. "I was in the area and thought I'd check on Daisy, make sure that leg healed properly. Hope you don't mind me just showing up." "Not at all." Jack climbed the porch steps and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. "How's she looking?" "Perfect. You did good work keeping that wound clean and letting her rest." Dr. Morrison scratched Daisy behind the ears, and the old dog leaned into it with obvious pleasure. "I also wanted to see how you were doing. It's been a few weeks since our talk." Jack looked out at his ranch, at all the visible signs of progress. "I'm doing better. A lot better, actually. Got the irrigation system fixed, partnered up with Tom Brenner, even started planning for the future instead of just surviving day to day. That's wonderful. Jack, really wonderful." She paused, then added, "Sarah would be proud." The words should have hurt. But they didn't. They just felt true. "She left me letters," Jack found himself saying, hidden around the ranch. "Instructions, advice, permission to keep living. The last one I found told me to let her go. Not forget her, but stop letting grief be the only thing in my life." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like Sarah, always thinking ahead, always trying to take care of people. You knew her well?" "Well enough. She brought Daisy to me for regular checkups, and we'd talk. About the ranch, about life, about being married to stubborn men who didn't know how to ask for help." She smiled. "She loved you very much, Jack. Used to say you were the best man she'd ever known, even when you were being difficult." Jack felt his throat tighten. "I miss her." "Of course you do. You always will. But missing someone doesn't mean you stop living. It just means you carry them with you while you do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Scout chase butterflies across the yard. Daisy dozed between them, her breathing steady and peaceful. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and somewhere in the distance Jack could hear cattle lowing. "I should get going," Dr. Morrison said eventually, standing up. "But Jack, I want you to know, if you ever need someone to talk to about Sarah or the ranch or anything else, I'm here. We're friends. We've been friends for years, even if you spent the last decade pretending we weren't friends." When had he last thought of anyone that way? When had he last let himself need people the way friends needed each other? "I appreciate that," Jack said. "And Ellen?" He stopped, surprised he'd used her first name. "Thank you. For checking on me. For caring. That's what friends do," she said simply. After she left, Jack stayed on the porch with both dogs, thinking about the day. Lunch with neighbors who'd become friends again. Plans for a cooperative that would bind him more tightly to his community. A conversation that reminded him he didn't have to carry everything alone. This was what Sarah's letters had been pointing him toward. Not just fixing the ranch, but fixing himself. Not just surviving, but building a life worth living. Scout brought him a stick, tail wagging hopefully. This time Jack took it and threw it across the yard, watching the young dog race after it with pure joy. Daisy watched too, her tail thumping against the porch boards in approval. "All right, boy," Jack called as Scout brought the stick back. "One more time." He threw the stick again, and Scout bounded after it, and Jack realized he was smiling. Really smiling, not just going through the motions. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it wasn't the only thing anymore. There was also this: dogs who loved him, friends who cared about him, a ranch that was coming back to life, and a future that held possibility instead of just emptiness. Sarah had given him all of this. Not the ranch, that had always been his, but the courage to save it, the wisdom to ask for help, the permission to live again. Her final gift was showing him that love didn't end with death, it just changed form. Jack sat on the porch until the sun started to set, throwing the stick for Scout, petting Daisy, and feeling more at peace than he had in 10 long years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to either retreat or engage. But tonight he had this moment, this peace, this sense that maybe, just maybe, he was going to be all right. 6 months after Scout's frantic barking pulled Jack from the edge of giving up entirely, the ranch held its first community gathering in over a decade. The cooperative meeting had evolved into something bigger, a celebration of what neighbors could accomplish when they worked together. Jack stood on his porch, watching trucks pull into the driveway, and felt something close to contentment. The yard had been cleaned up, the barn looked solid and proud, and tables borrowed from the church were set up under the cottonwood trees. Not the grove where he and Sarah had married, but the ones closer to the house that provided shade without stirring up ghosts. Tom and Linda arrived first, as always, bringing enough food to feed half the county. Carl and Margaret came next, followed by Pete Harrison and his daughter, Danny Murphy and his parents, Maria Rodriguez from the Extension Office, Dr. Morrison, and a dozen others who'd become part of Jack's life again. Scout greeted each arrival with enthusiasm, racing from truck to truck like he was personally responsible for welcoming everyone. Daisy supervised from the porch, moving slower these days, but still bright-eyed and present. She'd had a good long life, and every day with her felt like a gift, one Jack no longer took for granted. Quite a turnout, Tom said, joining Jack on the porch. You thinking what I'm thinking? That we might actually pull this cooperative thing off. That, and also that Sarah would have loved this. Tom gestured at the gathering crowd, the tables filling with food, the easy conversation and laughter. This is what she always wanted for you. Community, connection, life. Jack nodded, throat tight. She knew what I needed before I did. Left me a whole roadmap to find my way back. The cooperative was officially forming next month, 7 ranches banding together to share equipment, coordinate sustainable practices, and pool their marketing for direct-to-consumer beef sales. Jack had been elected treasurer, which both terrified and pleased him. It meant people trusted him, believed he was someone who could be counted on. He intended to prove them right. Linda started organizing the potluck with the efficiency of a general deploying troops, and soon the tables were laden with casseroles and salads, pies and bread. The kind of abundance that came when everyone contributed. Jack had made his contribution too, a beef roast from his own cattle, prepared using a recipe Sarah had loved. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest effort, and that counted for something. As people filled their plates, Jack found himself pulled into conversations. Carl wanted advice on a water retention project. Pete's daughter asked about hiring on for summer work. Maria had new information about a grant program that could help fund some of the cooperative's initial equipment purchases. Every interaction was a reminder that he was part of something bigger than himself, that isolation had been a choice, and connection was a choice too. He'd chosen wrong for 10 years, but he was choosing right now, and that was what mattered. Dr. Morrison found him as the sun started to set, the crowd thinning as people headed home to evening chores. Good turnout, she said, settling into one of the porch chairs. You should be proud. Couldn't have done it without help. Lot of help. That's the point, isn't it? None of us can do it alone. She paused, then added, I wanted to tell you something. I'm thinking of expanding the clinic, maybe hiring a partner. The area needs another vet, and I'm not getting any younger. That's good news, Jack said. You've been carrying a heavy load. We all have. But I'm learning, same as you, that it's okay to share the weight. She smiled. Sarah taught me that too, you know. She was good at reminding people they didn't have to be superhuman. After Ellen left, Jack sat on the porch with both dogs, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. Scout was finally tired from running around all day, lying with his head on Daisy's back. Daisy's eyes were closed, but her tail thumped gently when Jack reached over to pet her. We did good today, Jack told them. All of us. This ranch is alive again. Really alive. He thought about the journey from that morning when Scout's barking had pierced through his isolation, the rescue from the ditch, the vet visit that forced him to reach out for help, the letters from Sarah that gave him permission to grieve and then to live. Every step had been hard, every choice to engage instead of retreat had required courage he didn't know he had. But he'd done it. Not perfectly, not without stumbles and doubts, but he'd done it. The ranch was sustainable now, partnered with neighbors, invested in practices that could weather drought and economic hardship. The house felt like a home again, filled with the sound of dogs and the memory of laughter from today's gathering. And Jack himself, he was different. Not healed, because grief didn't work that way, but whole in a new way. Scarred but stronger, aware of what he'd lost, but also grateful for what he still had. He pulled out his wallet and removed the small photograph he'd started carrying. Sarah at 30, standing in front of the barn, her smile bright enough to light up the whole county. He looked at it for a long moment, then spoke to her the way he did most evenings now. "I did what you asked," he said quietly. "Let people in. Fix the ranch. Learn to live again. It wasn't easy, and some days I still want to give up. But I'm trying, Sarah. Every day I'm trying." The breeze picked up, carrying the smell of sage and possibility. Jack chose to take it as an answer, as Sarah's way of saying she saw him, was proud of him, loved him still across whatever distance separated them. Scout stirred, lifted his head, and licked Jack's hand. The simple gesture of affection from a dog who'd saved his mother and, in doing so, had saved Jack too. "Good boy," Jack murmured, scratching behind Scout's ears. "Best boy. You and your mama both." As darkness settled over the ranch, Jack remained on the porch, surrounded by dogs and memories and the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. Tomorrow would bring new work. Fence repairs, cattle rotations, cooperative meetings, all the endless tasks of keeping a ranch alive. But tomorrow would also bring Tom stopping by for coffee and Linda's texts about upcoming gatherings, and the knowledge that he wasn't facing any of it alone. The ranch lights glowed warm in the darkness. Inside, the house waited, not empty, not anymore, but full of possibility, full of life. Jack stood, joints protesting slightly but strong enough, and called the dogs. They followed him inside, Scout bounding ahead, Daisy taking her time but steady and sure. Jack locked the door, turned off the porch light, and headed upstairs. The cedar box was still in the nightstand drawer. He opened it and looked at Sarah's ring. The same ritual he'd maintained for years, but tonight it felt different. Not like visiting a grave, but like honoring a memory. Not like holding on to the past, but like carrying it gently into the future. "Thank you," he said one more time, "for everything. For loving me, for saving me, for showing me how to live again." He closed the box, turned off the light, and lay down in bed. Both dogs had followed him upstairs, something he'd started allowing a few months back, and they settled into their spots, Scout at the foot of the bed, Daisy on the rug nearby. This was his life now. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd had with Sarah, but a good life nonetheless. A life built on hard work and community and the loyalty of two dogs who'd refused to let him disappear into grief. As Jack drifted off to sleep, his last thought was a simple one. Tomorrow he'd wake up and keep going. He'd work the ranch, help his neighbors, take care of the dogs, and build something worth building. That's what Sarah had wanted. That's what Scout's desperate barking had called him back to, and that's exactly what he was going to do, one day at a time, one choice at a time, for as long as he had left. The ranch was alive. He was alive, and that finally was enough.